Hello and welcome to Ask an Apologist. My name is Matthew Middleberg and I'm joined here by Alicia Wood, Mike Sherrard, and our special guest, Brandon McGuire of Daily Dose of Wisdom. Thank you so much for joining us, Brandon.
You kind of said that like brain den, like my brain is in a den, and I
Brandon.
wasn't mad.
Your
I heard
brain is like a
brain
den.
dead.
Brain
Oh
dead.
no. I would never say that. You've got such a giant brain, it fills up an entire den, honestly. Uh, cool, man. Well, thank you for joining us. If it's your first time joining the live stream, this is a once a month live stream that we have called Ask an Apologist, where you can come, you can bring your questions, and you can ask an apologist your spiritual questions. So whether that's something that you are wrestling with your faith, or if you're not a believer and you're curious about Christianity, or whether you have questions on behalf of a friend, you can ask those here in the chat, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook or on X. We are happy that you are here joining us. Please feel free to retweet, to share this with your friends so that more people can join the conversation. So, Brandon, just as we begin, would love to ask you, you've got one of the largest and most influential YouTube channels for apologetics on the internet. And would love to just know, how did that start for you? How did you get involved in that? Tell us the story of the Daily Dose of Wisdom.
The simplest way to explain it is like I think everybody else. I'm watching YouTube. I'm coming across content that I find to be interesting, that I like, and I'm seeing commentary and reaction made to these conversations that I'm watching, but I totally disagree with the commentary. And I'm looking for something like that, but that is, uh, I guess you could say, coming from a Christian perspective. And to be clear, I'm not even talking about just debates, but oh man, there was a really interesting, I don't know, like moment on the Joe Rogan Experience is probably the most cliche example where there was, actually a great example would be, what's his name? Chris Hemsworth, Thor, was just on Theo Vaughn's Last Weekend podcast, and he
Oh,
was telling
interesting.
like all about his spiritual journey and how he basically has achieved all of his goals, and yet the goalpost keeps moving. Like there's something inside of a human being that just like will create a new goal. And he's like, I didn't have my life thought this far forward or into this much success. And every horizon that I ever looked at, I've gotten there. And yet my soul basically keeps aiming at another target,
Wow.
and he was basically just describing like the book of Ecclesiastes. He's like, I don't know what it is, but it's just like he even says, I find myself like knowing that I should like find solace and like practice like mindfulness and stillness, but I don't even know if I want to do that, or I don't know how to do that. And so even that feels like there's some cognitive dissonance around that where it's almost like he was saying like I'm kind of afraid to just be totally still and actually reflect on the state of my existence and the state of my soul and the state of my eternity. Like it's kind of easier to not really do that and to kind of just keep aiming at the next goal and the next goal and the next goal and so far and so on and so forth. So, for example, something like that, I'm listening to it. I'm like, oh man, there's so many connections between what he's saying as a non-Christian to the answers that the Bible gives to the human condition. And so that's the type of video that I would watch, and I would go, yes, it is really the case that we are ever wondering and ever searching until we find our rest in God. Like that really is the state of the human condition. And here is Thor, a god of sorts, facing that very question. So that's the type of thing. I see something like that, and I find that it is deserving of commentary, and that there are just arrows that you can take from that type of a honest confession and point back to the message of the Bible and ultimately the message of the cross.
Wow. I love that so much about your channel because I feel like there are so many. I mean, the world is just so vast and large, and there's so much happening all at once. But there are these cultural moments that are happening that I wish I knew about. I wish I knew, like, I had no idea that Chris Hemsworth was on that podcast and that he was asking these kinds of questions. But that's such a joy to hear that and to get your analysis of it and your reaction to it. So I love that your channel exists, and I love that people get to hear your thoughts on these issues. So
Yeah, you
yeah,
do.
what
You do a
sort of
great job,
yeah
Brandon.
yeah absolutely.
I have fun. I have fun doing it. It's funny that it's a thing that someone can do full time. Is just do the thing that I just described, and that,
Well,
that
not
somehow at
everyone
this.
can do it full time. You kind of have to be really good at it.
Well, I guess I mean the fact that even one person can, that we live in such a time where it's even possible for one person to be able to communicate ideas into a camera, and that actually like amounts to like
Mhm.
the thing that you do with your time. Like it's kind of remarkable, but I'm extremely uh like genuinely just really thankful to, I mean, Mike, we go way back. You know, when I was just scrapping around and you know, I mean, I'm still scrapping around, but you know what I mean? Like I just have always wanted um to try to get the message out of what Christianity has to offer in a culture that feels like it's been there, done that, already heard it, already knows why they reject it. And I know when we first connected, Mike, it's like there's so many different misconstructions and misrepresentations and misunderstandings about what Christianity truly is. And I've been passionate about trying to like go into that mess for a long time and be like,
Yeah.
we're not saying, we are saying this, we're not saying that, we are saying this. We could go into as much particulars as you guys want, but just that project of distilling what is mere Christianity and what are a lot of the things that are of a cultural nature that have gotten mixed in along the way and that we maybe ought to confess for and just move fast. But just, I don't know, just being on that journey with people who, like Chris Hemsworth, are literally like, what is going on? I suddenly exist on this one planet that has life in the distant corner of the universe, and I suddenly find myself with longings and aches and relationships and desires. And what is really this all about? Like, what is the human experience about or for? Like, what best explains reality, basically? And you know, I do think that Christianity is the best explanation of reality, but I think in order for that to resonate with somebody in this culture and in this day, you have to work through so much baggage and so many different ideas that are attached to even the words that I'm using. Like there's so many different ideas that spark up in someone's mind, I'm sure, as I even say what I'm saying. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but I love this work. And
Well,
you know, regardless of YouTube or whatnot, it's a fun thing to be involved with.
you've done good work, and you're a good man. And one of the things I'm proud when I see your work, and in an age where a lot of people build their social media empires off of destroying opposing views, you simply confront, and there's a big difference there. There's, yeah, a lot of people's agenda is to destroy opponents. Now, again, Paul talks about destroying arguments, but a lot of times the YouTube, social media, Christian apologists and beyond, they just want to destroy the person, and it all gets messy. It all gets just thrown together. But you, to me, it seems that there's a kind of a purity and an integrity and just a goodness about what you're trying to do in confronting false beliefs, destructive ideas, dangerous ideas, and destroying those ideas, but you do so in a way where you're confronting them and the person that holds them, instead of just this kind of vitriolic, ride in on a sword, I'm going to slay the enemies. And time and a place for things like that. But I think hopefully I'm making sense to what my point is here. You're
I
threading a needle
try.
here, which is pretty hard to do, I think.
I try to thread that needle in that way where there's the balance between like let your speech be seasoned with grace and also love rejoices in the truth. And I try that and I fail. Actually, I can think of videos where it's like I was in my feels, I was triggered, and everyone who watched that video could kind of tell I was being passive aggressive. Shame on me. So, but generally speaking, like it's not helpful to punch down or take the low road. Like it's always better to take the high road, and that's what Christ calls us to. Like he's the ultimate example of not punching down and keeping his chin up in the face of adversity. And even if you're being mocked, like literally mocked, he never condescends to that same type of a conflict, and he wins in a different way. So that's definitely the goal. And if I have even a little bit succeeded in that goal, then that's good feedback. So thank you, Mike.
You do. I mean, I've watched some of your videos where you're responding, like you say, to people who are mocking you, and you just ignore it. And it's really inspiring to see, because I think, yeah, there are moments where somebody insults my intelligence, or they insult my integrity, especially, where I want to react in anger. It bothers me, and I love that you don't typically do that. You're very, very gracious in how you respond, and yeah, that's inspiring. So um, I wanted to ask too, how do you decide which cultural moments are worth responding to and which ones are not? They're just noise, or they're just random.
Yeah, I honestly miss so many moments, which is unfortunate. And even more so, that's the case recently with being 7 weeks postpartum, if that's how you say it as a guy. My wife is 7 weeks postpartum, and I'm along for the ride. Um,
Wow.
so that it recently has like changed where it's like, oh, I see that, and that would be great. And I would totally jump on that right now because I know that the timing is right, and the sort of nexus between what I talk and care about and what the culture talks and cares about is present. But I just don't have the bandwidth right now. So I'm gonna leave that for somebody else. And sometimes you see some other channel pick it up and you're like, yay, they did it. And other times you're like, oh, that just kind of went down the transmission of content, and just it is what it is. Maybe I'll pick it up later. But I have like a dozen videos right now that I think would make for a good video, and I just don't have the bandwidth to make. So there's always that selection process. But generally speaking, you like the Chris Hemsworth example that I just gave is I think a good example where he has his own gravity, and that's good. Theo Vaughn has his own gravity, and that's good. And so when you find two people like that talking together, and then when the subject matter relates to what I care about and what I think is ultimately significant, that's a pretty clear overlapping of elements to where that would be a good video, basically.
That's cool. Yeah, because I care what Thor's gonna say about God. Like that's
Yeah.
fascinating. That's really, really interesting. So
Yeah. And you can
uh,
kind of imagine like the title, like, how are you going to tie that in? And like,
yeah.
Yeah,
one
what
of the
Thor thinks
3,000
about God.
gods.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Um, you've reached
Now I
a
need to
lot
make
of
that
people.
video. I haven't actually made that video. So now I'm like,
Now
okay,
you gotta.
we
Now
got to
you
do this now.
gotta. Let's do it. One of the things I was curious about too is, people are watching your videos. How have you seen kind of these short form videos, or even some of your longer interviews, kind of affect people's openness to God, or their engagement with spiritual issues? Have you seen people commenting that what you're doing is um, helping them, or guiding them towards spiritual truth, or what have you seen in people's reactions?
Yes. Sometimes I think that for whatever reason, negative feedback is louder than positive feedback. So
Totally. Yep.
you kind of can get the impression sometimes of like, am I just like offending a bunch of people, or am I just like, you know, um, yeah. So you can sometimes feel that way, but then for every, let's say, I don't know, 10 really negative comments or something like that on a video, there will be one, or even there'll be something like in a DM or an email or something that's extraordinarily positive,
Mm,
and it's like deep and it's personal, and someone's like, I want you to know, like, and they'll like tell you their story, and you can kind of get
mm,
that glimpse of how the mission of the channel intersected with their spiritual journey, and how God basically connected those two things together in a way where it was able to actually help them in their life, in their pursuit of God.
Mm.
So to me, I'll like happily endure a million negative comments for one email like that. And
Wow.
luckily the ratio isn't that bad.
That's really good. I love that. What sort of videos were you surprised that like connected with people or that they were more interested in than you thought they might have been?
That's a good question. It's actually kind of hard to pin down which like people in the examples I'm thinking of where it'll be like an email or a DM or something like that, or even like a person that's like at Walmart or something.
Mm,
It's like it's not I don't think it's tethered to a single video, or at least
mm,
I'm racking my brain if they've said like it was that video. I think it's more just the nature of how YouTube is, where it's like if someone watches through something, then they kind of just get served the next one, and then they kind of get served the next one. So I think it's probably just that process of all of a sudden they watched 20 videos and
mm,
they just got a plethora of different, I don't know, arguments or
mm,
perspective shifts or whatever, and then that amounted to them just realizing that maybe they had like a straw man or something, and they don't know exactly where even that shift happened, but they have just been watching the content, and all of a sudden they realize like, hey, I think my perspective is shifting a little bit here.
mm.
I think it's more like that because
Yeah.
I'm sure there's sometimes where it's like that one video that one time like really did it for me, but I think probably it's more. I mean, think about it. What is something for you guys, or I don't even see the chat if there's anybody listen, like just think about your YouTube experience where let's imagine all of a sudden you get into fishing and you watch one fishing video. The next day when you come on YouTube, it's going to be another fishing video and you're going to go, "Oh, how to use a crankbait to catch largemouth bass," and he caught a 10-pound bass. Click. And then the next day it's going to be like whatever, right? And all of a sudden you're just like down that rabbit trail. And
Mm,
that's just the nature of YouTube, right? And so I think that that's what people are experiencing with my channel as well. It's like I like that question, answer, and commentary. Oh, this is another one, a different question with a different answer and a different commentary,
mm.
but the same thing that I liked before. Click. And so I think people end up getting the whole bundle, or at least more often than not, I think that's the case.
Yeah, that really makes sense because I think it's not just the information, the propositions that you're teaching them. It's the way of thinking deeply about your faith and thinking rationally about these kinds of topics and issues. And when they watch your content, when they watch these videos, they're uh, introduced to a whole new way of thinking about faith that sometimes churches have not taught their people. Hey, you can ask like deep questions, you can think logically, you can think rationally, and I think people will be transformed and kind of just taught to think differently, even just by watching your content, and that can be huge.
Which is kind of funny because even like the name of this show or segment, Ask an Apologist, like I never really think of myself as an apologist. That's not something I've ever aspired towards. It's not something I've been schooled in. So in a sense, I guess if I am fundamentally like defending Christianity or even that, I'm like, am I defend or just making a case for the veracity of Christianity or whatever? If that makes me an apologist, then okay, then I am, I suppose. But it's interesting how I'll speak from the first person. I have a story filled with questions,
Hmm.
and so when I personally am trying to understand how do things make sense, and who is God, and does this actually make sense, and how does like you know foreknowledge and causation play into like human
Mm,
agency, like does this actually
mm,
make sense, what is like really the nature of hell, and on, right? And so it's just as a byproduct of your own of one's own search for answers and one's own search for truth that you accident at least in my case you accidentally then have a perspective or you accidentally have answers and you realize for me it's like it's because I deconstructed. It's because I was like on the
mm.
absolute edge of the cliff about ready to jump away from God
Wow.
forever that I really empathize and relate with the person who is on a similar precipice. Like I
Mm,
really do understand how you can get there. I understand how that feels. I understand all the like verses in the Old Testament that you can cherry pick out and go, wait, hold on. What's going on here? Like I understand all of that. And for me, it's just, I mean, it's a long story that we don't have to go into now, but it's just in spite of all of that, and in spite of not having every question answered at the time, God just showed himself to be real and ultimate goodness and ultimate value and ultimate love and personal and desirous of me in a way that is just undeniably true. And when that happens to you, you realize, okay, I still have unanswered questions, but I now know that God is real and good and loving and for me and not against me. Let's now walk together into the unknown that still remains. And so I think that it's kind of funny, and I try to bring in that personal side to things because, but it's hard with content, and it's hard on YouTube to end every video with something like that that's so sort of experiential and emotional and whatever, because that's not how life is all of the time. But I try as often as I can to say truth matters. There is like good and bad answers. Things are thus and so. But as much as that is all in play, there is a whole other side to it, which is what are the contours of your heart and your receptiveness to the raw facts of the matter. And I really think that matters like just as much. Like if you're being given nothing but truth, but you just are totally offended by God and you just don't want to hear it, you're just not going to hear it. So I feel like part of the job is trying to till the soil and find some, like, is there any openness that you have to the idea that God might be good and not bad? I see where you're looking to see that he's bad. I see where the offense is coming in. But is there any openness that if he's omniscient and you're not, that there might be more to the picture that you're missing that would justify him in your eyes and therefore make it possible for him to justify you before himself? Like, is that all in the cards? And so I don't know. It's delicate because a lot of it is emotional and psychological as much as it is like rational. Like that just we're humans, and that is how things are.
Wow, that was really, really well said. And I think you're right. Like we tend to think of ourselves as these neutral observers, like fairly evaluating everything. And it's not really true. You know, we have biases certain ways, we have interests. And I often say that when you begin to understand the Christian story, you should want it to be true. Even if you don't yet believe, I think you should want this to be true because it's the greatest story ever told. It's the greatest news ever told, that there is a God who loves you, who desires a relationship with you, who has created you for a purpose, who has a plan for your life that ends in ultimate satisfaction and relationship with him if you will but come to him. And I think that's really good news that you should want to be true. So yeah, really, really well said. We have a question here in the comments. And before I ask this question, just want to remind everybody that this is Ask an Apologist. So if you are interested in asking your questions, you can join the stream. You can share it with your friends, type them in the chat, and we will do our best to answer these questions. So Walt is asking, what do you find the most challenging couple of topics that need to be addressed in Christianity and in the church today?
There's a lot. The first two that come to my mind is the idea that science and faith are somehow opposing each other, and that in order to bite on Christianity and God, you have to reject science. I think that's a big one for a lot of people. I think that they look at some of the surface level readings of the Bible, certain numbers of ages of things and so on, and then they look at the consensus among cosmologists and they go, wait a second, so I have to either be a person of faith or be a person of science. I'm going to go with science. I'm not an idiot. I'm going to go with science. And so I think that's a big one for a lot of people. And I think that there is, how do I say it? Like some legwork that person would have to do in order to understand how, was it Galileo, I think, who said that there is conflict between, maybe this isn't Galileo. I'll just paraphrase whoever this is, but there you will find conflict between theology and science, because both theology and science are interpretations of the word and the world. There's no actual conflict between God's word and God's world, but science and theology interpret those two upstream realities, and in that interpretation all kinds of wires can get crossed, and you can find what looks like a genuine contradiction. So I think that's one thing. And then I think relativism as an ideology drapes over top of so many other conversations, whether it's in the moral realm, in terms of just truth statements in general. I think that if someone is, and speaking of letting your speech be seasoned with grace, I'm biting my tongue, but like I want to say like brainwashed by relativism, and I think that that's actually kind of accurate. It's like it's a pill that you swallow all the way down, and it like affects the way that you see all of reality. And so if someone's in that mental matrix, it's really difficult for them to it's difficult for them to believe in Christianity. It's difficult for them to morally reason. It has like vast implications into tons of other topics. And so I think just so the question is, what do you find the most challenging couple of topics that need to be addressed in Christianity in the church today? I guess I'm not talking so much about the church, but I think I see relativism creeping into Christianity as well. And I think that it's an important topic for us to know how to communicate about. Like, is relativism true or is it false? Is an interesting question. And I think that it's one that Christians need to be prepared to address.
Yeah. That's really
What
good.
you think,
Actually, I was going to say the same thing. I was going to say, I want to hear what everybody else thinks. I mean, I kind of go all around with this, depending on the era. And then I know Matthew was going to say something, so I'll let Matthew kind of finish what he was going to say. I think one of the things that we need to address is, I guess, what seems to be a recurrent, I don't want to say it's a recurrent pattern because maybe it's just become more aware now, but I think just the challenges people have with actually choosing what the Bible teaches us over the world. And I think you see a lot of Christians kind of wrestling between Christian teachings and world and cultural, let's say, maybe teachings. And I think a lot of that causes a lot of confusion amongst people who are not Christians and even amongst the Christian church. So I think maybe one topic is, why is it so hard for us to surrender to Christ as Lord and fully? And what I don't mean is, no Christian, and I will speak for everybody actually on this, is none of us are 100% right. And we have our failures. We have to ask for forgiveness. We have to repent. We do these things as a regular part of the Christian life. But I do think that there seems to be a struggle right now with just Christians choosing the hard road, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think, when people are trying to figure out what does Christianity believe in, you kind of see all these different things. It's like, well, if I want to be a Christian, then what am I going to believe? So I think one of the things we need to address is this whole thing of Christians needing to are we truly submitting and truly submitting our will or thought or mind, whatever, to the Lord? And that's why when we fail, those who've done that, when we fail, you actually have that sense of conviction, or like, I need to repent, I need to change. If you haven't done that, then when you fail and mess up, you just kind of keep going. You don't see it as any big deal. And so I think that is something that probably needs to be addressed as well. And also, to be honest, I don't know if this is a topic or not, but I just think the Christian social media presence is something to be can be confusing, because I think there is, and we kind of brought this up earlier, but this idea of, we are the arbitrators of justice, and we need to make sure that we tell people what we think of them online, and this kind of like maybe like over response to things that are wrong. And I think that that's probably something that the church really needs to consider, is what is our place in in terms of the level and degree of noise that we create, I think, when it comes to certain things. And I just see when, when one person, is doing something, I just see the people just keeping on them. And so I just think that kind of difference from what, just when you see Jesus, who actually sat with the sinners and talked with the outcasts and healed, like he wasn't as scared to get dirty as so many Christians are. And I think that is something that I think maybe as something that the church, topically wise, needs to get addressed. Not really apologetics questions is what I raised, but just different things maybe more so happening in the church that I think is something that we need to kind of sort out.
That's really interesting, Alicia. The social media witness of the church. Tell me what you think about this parallel. There's a lot of non-believers that have a negative reaction to Christianity through politics because of Christianity's the intermingling of Christianity and, let's say, the Republican Party, or you go back into the 80s, the moral majority and things like that. And the word evangelical almost has a political connotation now. And for so many people, they perceived that political right-wing part of our government as the voice and representation of Christianity, which we would say is false. That is not the true Christian voice, but from a cultural standpoint, sometimes it seemed as if it was the voice of Christianity. Similar comparison now to the social media world. And the burden that comes with a successful channel is you have become the voice of Christianity. And then you take successful channels together, the aggregate of them, they are the voice of Christianity. How do you steward that well? Should it be the voice of Christianity? Even is it the voice of Christianity? I mean, so this is why it's a challenging topic, is there's so much to cover here, but it tends to be something that I don't know how much corporate thought is given to this. Individual content creators like Brandon, for example, I know spends a lot of time wrestling with these things, but corporately, the church together thinking about how should our witness be extended through media platforms? What does it mean to steward it well? What does it mean to kind of provide oversight for that well? That's a challenging topic, but I think it needs to be addressed, because I don't even know if it is being addressed in the church. So that's an interesting point you raised there, Alicia. The way you said that made me think about this in a way I hadn't really been considering that.
It's kind of interesting, like even the language that is coming out of like Gen Z, Gen Alpha reflects, I think, something that you guys are touching on. Like this is kind of a funny example, but you'll hear phrases used in the real world, like "we cooked, chat," when someone is
my kids, man, my kids. If you're about to reprimand somebody, I'm gonna bring them in here. Because now I'm doing it. I'm saying chat. I'm saying cooked. And anyways,
and I'm focusing in on not even cooked, because that's funny, but not directly related. It's the idea of referring to the real group of people around you in the real world as the chat. Isn't that interesting? So interesting. which is prime reality, right? Is it what is referencing what? It's like the real world. I mean, this is not what I believe, but it's like, in a sense, the reference point, the real world, is the chat. And so then in the real world, we're calling our actual flesh and blood people around us chat. And that's just a silly kind of, rhetorical example, but I do think it reflects something where we're at kind of a tipping point where, depending on who you're talking about, their most meaningful connections in life might literally be happening through their screen. That could be where their true community is. Like that is certainly on the table for people. And I think about other cultures as well, where that's even more so the case, which is very strange. It's a very weird place to be in the human story, where there are really people who I felt the most connection in my day through the TikTok live stream, compared with the sterile, awkward, boring dinner table. Like that is a reality for some of these kids. And so I think that it has huge implications to the question that you guys are talking about, in terms of well, that's not how it's supposed to be. It's like the church is a physical. I mean, it's a communal, collective, flesh and blood thing. And to be clear, like I'm not saying that social media replaces the church. I'm not saying anything along those lines. I'm just saying we are facing this reality where people are largely and sometimes mainly influenced by and affected by what they're experiencing on their screen compared to what they're experiencing in the real world. And it's like that has huge implications for the proclamation of the gospel, and even honestly, to some extent, the definition of the church. Not that it would ever change the definition, but like what kind of a shape can that invisible, wonderful, mystical thing that God created called the church take? Like what are our options here? And so I think it's a phenomenal question that you guys are raising. And I think it's only going to get in the next 5-10 years, I think it's going to become more and more weird.
Yeah, it is. It is a challenge. And even from like, what is Orthodox Christianity? What is the mere Christianity? The successful channels are seeking to define that for the rest of us, or for Christianity broadly. And whether that's intentional or not, that is what is happening. And I see a lot of issues with this. And I'm not a anti-social media, anti-successful channels. We're literally participating in something like that right now. So it's more of a case of stewardship and using these platforms well because of the reality, Brandon, that you described, and knowing how Christianity is growing around the world through the internet and social media. So there is a way the Lord is clearly using this for good. But with every, great tool, you can use it in a destructive fashion. And so this is a challenging topic facing the church. And I wonder what, if this question really gets close to what Walt's asking in the first place. But as far as I can tell, one of the challenging topics for the church today is proper stewardship of media, social media in particular.
That's good. Well, and I think we need more social media engagement. I think we need to do it better and more graciously. But I think if every Christian was vocal about their faith online, we would have a different world, different perception of reality. I think a lot of Christians are silent because they don't want to offend somebody, or they don't want to speak up about their faith. Or they don't want to do it wrongly. And I think you can do it very poorly, and we need to be more gracious and more careful with how we interact. But I think we actually need to be more bold as well. And so I agree with you, what you said too, Brandon, about the science. I think that's a big issue. When in some of the statistics I've seen is when people leave the church for intellectual reasons, one of the top reasons is for science reasons, is they perceive science and faith as being incompatible, which is why I'm so thankful there have been some really good resources on that recently. The movie The Story of Everything was just in theaters, and that was fantastic. Really, really great resource. And there's been a lot of those that are kind of out there and reaching a lot of people. So,
hey, one more thing. I know we spent a ton of time on this, but I will be brief. And I think apologists exist in at least half of what we do. It's to serve and support the church, not just go reach the non-believers, but it's to support the church. So this question, challenging topics facing the church, one of them relates to theology. Reports have been showing for years and years and years the steady decline of biblical literacy and an understanding of a biblical worldview. Churches have to teach theology. They have to teach doctrine. The younger generations especially are desperate for it right now. So many of them, you've been reading these statistics, about 63% or 66% of kids that grow up in the church walk away when they get to college. So many of them, especially right now, are coming back, and they're realizing their ignorance when it comes to, I don't know who this God is. And the reason is that they've grown up in churches that didn't teach about who God is. They taught some kind of therapeutic moralism on how to live a good life, but it was disconnected from the reality of who is God. So the church needs to teach theology and doctrine, and it is very difficult. And I know this. I was a pastor, and I said I did this well, but I came, feeling this burden of my church probably isn't that different than most churches out there when it comes to these. So how do we do this? So we went through Tim Keller's, what was the catechism book he had? I forget what it was. Tim Keller did a book of catechism. And my idea was, we're going to do this for an entire year. Our preaching is going to reflect this. We're going to do this in children's ministry. Oh my goodness, was it challenging? And I don't even know that it was the best way to do it, but the church needs to grow in its understanding of who God is. The younger generations actually want this, but it's not the easiest of things to figure out how to do. So for what it's worth, churches, I have great sympathy and pastors for the work that you need to do in this regard. And I know many pastors out there are feeling this same burden and challenge right now.
Can I layer one thing on top of that? I know that we're exiting onto the next topic, but I do think it's kind of relevant here. So, and I'll also will try to be brief.
No, you're good.
There's something fundamentally different in a negative way, I believe, about the internet versus the real world, because in the real world, any communication that's taking place is taking place in the context of relationship, even if that's the most basic relationship, like a stranger that you met at the grocery store. That's still one of a few hundred or a few thousand people who you've ever talked with face to face in your life. So there is still some sort of a relational buy-in that is necessary in order for the communication to take place. And there's also the potential of, hey, that conversation went really well. Oh, you go to this Publix, I go to this Publix. I'm from Florida, so we do Publix, whatever the case might be for your grocery store. Hey, oh, you're in the neighborhood. Oh, where do you know, and a relationship can kick off. So it's fundamentally different than the internet and social media. The currency isn't relationship, it is attention. And so when you have all of these algorithms designed to capture and keep attention, and here we are trying to proclaim the gospel and make disciples, we're having to build those messages on top of an infrastructure that is designed in a very particular way. And I don't believe that way that it's designed is as conducive to the thing that we're aiming at as the real world is. So I think that there's something there that is, like I said, there's a fundamental disadvantage to achieve the goal that we're trying to achieve when you're playing in that arena, which is the reason that I say it's a great like middle ground. It's a great top of funnel. It's a great like access point. But I don't think that it actually can replace the real world and real relationships and an actual human experience of the body of Christ in the church. And basically, like, discipleship is relationship, right? Like you're sitting at someone's feet and you're learning to be, and you're learning from that person. I don't believe that can happen in the same way through the internet. And then I think there's just all kinds of collateral damage that comes along with, oh, so if the currency is attention, then conflict is now a major mechanism. And what the most just like attention grabbing way I can go about communicating this message, and everyone is competing with each other for everyone else's attention. And so it is very natural that you start to at least really have to question, like, am I compromising the message in some way by playing kind of by the rules of the game of social media? Like, the people who design these companies don't care about the same things that we care about. And yet I'm not a isolationist. I'm not saying we shouldn't be there. I'm just saying we should be very presently aware that, and I the thought that triggered this was when you said every Christian publicly, making declaring their faith on social media. I agree with that. I just think that there's another layer to this, which is how first of all, how would that go if nobody had any type of awareness? Like, you could very easily just be talking into an echo chamber, or just like talking to no one if you don't kind of understand the rules of the game. But then the second that you do understand the rules of the game, it's now like, okay, are you compromising what you're trying to do? Are you like, like, it's just funny, right? Like imagine like in the Bible, it's like, hey, the gospel according to John, 5 things you should know about Jesus, and the 5th one is the craziest one of all. Like, stick around. It's like there's just something about that is just, it's just different, right? So I just wanted to mention that again, not that we should be afraid of it or run from it, but I think as Christians communicating online, we have to be aware that the currency is attention. And
Hmm.
if that's true, how does that affect the integrity of what we're trying to do? How do we like access the upside of that without giving in to the bestial underbelly of the whole machine, basically?
Wow. That's fascinating.
That's good.
Well, I'm gonna cut it off there for that question, which was extremely thought provoking. Thank you for that, Walt. We could probably talk for another hour just about these questions and topics. Let me go to the second question that was submitted from Pepper, and she's asking kind of a specific question about a kind of scientific argument about the development of species, and she's saying, "Hey, Alicia, I don't know if this is directed at Alicia to answer the question, or if she's just saying hi, or if she's referencing Alicia's podcast, which you should listen to and subscribe to, which is Hey Alicia." But she's asking, what about this apologetics argument from the why would an asexual organism ever become a sexual organism, and how could two independent beings have complex organs evolving in tandem to produce more beings? She's heard this from one particular apologist, Norm Geisler. Why isn't this used more? I think it's maybe a kind of a version of irreducible complexity. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I would think so. And I don't know if she is addressing it to me, but I'll just start off and just share some thoughts about this one. I think what you're raising is a really it's important because it raises a flaw with naturalistic evolutionary theory that maybe isn't always addressed when, and that's simply just this apparent perception of design. You know, when things evolve, most of the time, you know, these particular genes that don't replicate the way that they should, it leads to deformities, it leads to problems, it affects the species' ability to reproduce. And yet we have, and what we see here with what this, even some of the ones that you just laid out, and even others, that it actually, all of these changes from one species to another has actually led to the thriving of, and they've all fit and they've all worked. And this is part of the tension between evolution, which is because there's no designer, it's a random process, and it's not designed, and you've got the idea of God who is designed. So how do you have the two in tandem? How do you have randomness and have design at the same time? And that's one of the questions that I think people pose to the evolutionary theory, even from a Christian perspective. If God does use evolution, then how is it that it's designed when actually evolution says that things happen randomly? And so there's a bit of this tension here. It's something that Stephen Meyer, I know, has raised before, and I think it's a good point. So I would say what you're raising is indications that it just doesn't seem, how is it possible that these things would evolve and work so well? And I think for a lot of people, they may not think about that as well. And this is why I think at the very basic, whether you believe in whatever religion, no religion, even if you don't want to even adhere to religion, I think holding the view that there is an intelligent designer, I do think is an intellectual perspective. That doesn't mean that you are a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or whatever, but just at the base level, that there is some intellectual designer behind this universe, I think is a completely rational, and I think a very sensible position to take in response to the evidence. And this is the view of the Discovery Institute, who just argues just for intelligent design. That's a whole Stephen Meyer thing. But it's also, I think this is why you see that physicists tend to be theists of some sort, because when they see things on such a micro level and in the tiny level and the theoretical level, like there's just no way that all of this could have worked without design. And so I just think at the bare minimum, I really do think that the intelligent just design, I think when we hear intelligent design, we think, oh, you're trying to make me become a Christian, or you're trying to make me become this. It's like, hold on a second. I think intelligent design, yeah, there are further questions you have to ask if you do believe in intelligent designer, absolutely. But I just think when you look at what there is, I think that is the baseline conclusion that I think someone needs to make. The more science we discover, the complexity of a cell. I truly think if Charles Darwin came back today, he would look at the scientific community and be like, you morons. Like, I didn't understand the complexity of a cell. Like he's like, when I was coming up with this, I didn't know the inner workings and all of the things that happened. That what is it? I can't even remember all the little words, but I remember watching. There's like these little things that crawl along and move around. I mean, it's just amazing. Like the cell is amazing. And I wonder if Darwin would have been like, wake up! Like I didn't have the knowledge you guys have today, and so you're using a theory that I had with very little knowledge, and you're applying it, and you have so much more. Adapt the theory. Change it, modify it. Let's take all of your new evidence and allow that to change where I started. And I think there's been a pushback because it just says if you reject this and you're going to say you believe in God, and that is really the issue that people have is where does this lead? So all that to say, I think that you raise a good point, Pepper, and maybe it is something people need to address more often.
Well, even go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think those are both great questions that Pepper has posed there. And there are dozens of questions standing next to those ones that there are also not answers to. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of things that science does not have an answer to. So what happens is, because it is the case that natural selection acting on mutation can cause change in biology, that is true, and Darwin did observe that rightly. People will take that true statement and stretch it way beyond what is actually evidence-based. And any question like the ones that she's raised there, or I mean, like I said, there's literally hundreds of these. How does the bombardier beetle not explode itself before evolving? How does a normal bird turn into a woodpecker where its tongue wraps all the way around the back of its brain? And I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of things that we don't actually understand what the intermediary steps are, or how could you go from this to this? How can, if everything is from a common ancestor, we have no knowledge about those actual like intermediary steps and processes, nor do we have evidence for them in the fossil record, awkwardly enough. But the point is that the true observation that Darwin made is simply being draped over top as a catch-all for all of the unknown and all of the unanswered questions. And because it's bought into fully, a person would just say, I don't know. I don't know. But just because I don't know the answer to Pepper's questions doesn't mean that natural selection acting on mutation at the genetic level doesn't answer these questions. We just don't understand yet. But I do understand, and I do firmly believe that it is the case that all questions can be answered by that single truth that Darwin accessed or posited. Everything can ultimately be explained by natural selection acting on mutation. We just don't know all the details yet, right? And so that's where I think it's a very faith-based position, where it's like, how many things do you not explain or answer that you're going to continuously fit Darwin's observation into the gap of and into the gap of and into the gap of, rather than just saying, is it possibly the case that there's something reductive about that, and that again we're taking a true thing and just stretching it way beyond where it actually has explanatory power.
It's good. Well,
yeah,
I think
Pepper, you raise a good question.
Too, and let me just say, I think the argument also is that not just that we don't know how these things developed, but that it seems like they couldn't have developed through successive addition. And Darwin himself said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. So I think you're right, Alicia. Like if he were around today, he would potentially go, look, these things can't have been formed through successive addition. And he might change his mind. Who knows? Mike,
I was just going to say, good question, Pepper. And if you are the Pepper Adams that is my friend, I'm sorry that they spent the last 10 minutes calling you a she.
I mean, it's just natural assumption. Pepper Potts, so. Good.
Pepper Potts.
We've got a question from Larry the Tapeworm. Interesting translation of Psalm 22 there for your name. Good reference. I think the disconnect is that you cannot choose to believe that which you're not convinced of. a lot of Christians are convinced for reasons that don't really convince me. Brandon, what do you think about this kind of this topic of being convinced of different things, and whether you can kind of force yourself to be convinced of something that you aren't convinced of?
I actually love this this comment, and I think there's a lot of truth in it. I think that it has limits, but I think there's a lot of truth in it. It really does get into how agency works, basically. So,
Mhm.
to set a baseline, I cannot make myself, um, by an act of the will, like love the taste of throw up. That's not something I could choose to eat throw up, but it would be the worst experience ever, and I can't will myself to uh, feel otherwise, right? So, and I can't fly to the moon. So yeah, there's all kinds of limitations on me as an agent. The question is, when it comes to truth, what role do we play in the shaping of our own understanding and in the shaping of our own sense of what is or is not plausible? Are we totally passive and do things just come at us, and we are kind of just like a static sponge that just gets hit with different types of solutions, and we just have to absorb everything, and whatever sticks? Is it basically totally deterministic and passive like that? Or as agents, do we again have our own internal filters and mechanisms and ways that we interpret data, and either like it or not for different reasons, some of which might be emotional, some of which might be psychological, some of which might be spiritual? And are we as individual agents basically playing a role in the process of what we end up finding to be plausible or not? And I think we have to look at it sort of on a case by case basis, because I do think there's some things, like the weird example I used about, I it would be impossible to convince me that throw up tastes good. It's just not in the cards. It's disgusting, right? Um, so, but is everything like that? Is
Hmm.
everything? And I would say no. I think there's all kinds of things where you have a case laid out before you, and you go, "Oh, my mind was changed, and I actually basically buy into a different premise or a different conclusion rather than I had originally." But I think so. I think Larry probably would agree with that. But then the question is everything just a math problem of, if you could just say 2 + 2 =, and I go, oh shucks, yeah, you're right, it's 4. Okay, I have no choice in accepting that. Is everything like that? I don't think that it is. I think a lot of things are more like chocolate or vanilla. Which do you like more? Well, I have certain reasons, for preferring one over the other. There's all kinds of like background information that's gonna play a role in shaping that. And so, um I think fundamentally that particular comment assumes a level of determinism that I would reject when it comes to the way that persons interact with the world, and specifically truth claims, is I think the simplest way I can put it.
Hmm. It's really
And
good.
Larry, if I can just add on, I think I hear you, right? And I think belief for different people looks differently in terms of what they find compelling. Matthew, Mike, and I were talking about something, a particular theological argument before we got on this call that Matthew finds really compelling. Well, let's just say that works for Matthew, but let's just say it doesn't work for Mike and I. That's okay, because Mike and I might find something else that's more compelling. And I think so. I think a lot of Christians are convinced of the truth of Christianity, but for various reasons. And I think that's okay. In the same sense, though, if you're someone who's heard a lot of different arguments for Christianity and you find yourself not convinced, I would ask yourself, what would it take for me to believe? Why is it that none of these things actually seem to compel me or convince me? Is it because there truly are failures in the arguments? Or is it because there's something else going on within me that no matter what, I'm going to push back? Because even if we say, okay, Christianity, doesn't have good arguments, but there's a lot of them out there. Okay. And so you could at least, at the very least, say, man, there is an abundance, though, of arguments for Christianity. Why is it that I find every single one of them not okay? Like, is it truly possible that none of them are that credible? Is it truly possible that I shouldn't think about any of them? Like, I think that sometimes becomes one of the questions we have to start asking. It doesn't matter to me how many times, somebody may tell me something if I don't want it to be true, or if the issue lies somewhere apart from the arguments, and it doesn't almost matter how good the arguments are. And so I think, Larry, I agree, you can't, you don't want to choose to believe something which you're not convinced of, but I'd also ask myself, there's a lot of things that I believe in this world with like two pieces of evidence. Like, for example, my mother's my mother. How do I know that? Because she told me. That's it. And then I grew up with her, and I look exactly like her. So those are some pretty compelling things. But you know what I've never done is I've never given her a DNA test. And so would somebody look at me and say, well, that's irrational that you would believe that's your mother from three pieces of evidence? You actually need the concrete proof of a DNA test in order to do that. And it's like, well, actually, no, I don't actually, because actually these three things are compelling enough. And so sometimes when we hear so many different arguments for Christianity, we find ourselves saying, nope, I disagree with that one, disagree with that one. That's not good enough. That's not compelling enough. That's not accurate enough. Sometimes it might be worth saying, well, what would it then take for me to believe? Or why would I not want this to be true? Or why is it that I managed to find a fault with every single thing? Is it that all the arguments are faulty, or is there something else going on here?
Yeah, I think you're right, Alicia, that some people are more apt to believe for certain reasons than others. And I think sometimes that has to do with your experience, right? If you've had a bad experience with the church, or you've had hypocritical people in your life that have claimed to be Christians but mistreated you, that's going to kind of give you the desire not for it to not be true. But I do think, going back to what you said, Brandon, that there is an element to, I think your example is extreme of, you can't force yourself to throw up, but there are certain things that you can acquire the taste of. For me, with coffee, there was a decision that I made. I said, I want to drink coffee. It's interesting. I want to be a coffee drinker. And so I just drank coffee, and it tasted like dirt. It tasted like dirt in water. And I just kept drinking it until eventually I was like, the dirt tastes a little bit better today, actually. And eventually it got to the point where, you know what, actually, I really enjoy the taste of coffee. So I think we sometimes underestimate our ability to change our preferences or change our desires. You can't just by a force of the will want something to be different, but you could want it to want it. And I think that will result in acting in different ways. So for somebody who has had a bad experience with Christians, maybe you should try to replace that with a good experience of Christians. Go back to church, go to a different church, try opening up the Bible for yourself and read the words of Jesus to see, actually, you know what, people are telling me this is such a good thing. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe there's a reason why Christians are so passionate about Jesus and about what they love about him, and they say they have this relationship with him. And I would encourage you to do those sorts of things to, like I said before, I think when you understand the Christian message, you should want it to be true. And you should desire it for it to be true. And that doesn't mean you're ever going to get to the point where I think this is a huge misconception sometimes, where it's like, well, I'm not forced by the evidence to believe this thing, and therefore I can't believe it. Right? Your evidence hasn't proven it to me, and therefore I'm not going to believe it. Well, I don't think it generally, for most people, it doesn't reach that point where it's like, I just have zero choice now to either believe or not believe. I have to believe. I actually think there's always this element of choice where we take a step of faith and we say, you know what, it's not absolutely proven to me beyond a shadow of a doubt, but the evidence does seem to point in this way, and I know enough to say, I'm going to trust this thing. I'm going to trust Jesus. I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to put my faith in him. I think that's the way it is with many things in life, not just with God, where you have a set of data, you have a set of evidence, and it's not overwhelming, but it is persuasive. And I think that's a topic worth exploring as well.
can I layer one thing onto that really quick, which is just
Yeah.
to say for Larry that for everything that you are not convinced of, you are convinced of something else in its place. And I would invite you to really self-assess if you're consistent with your standard of what you're convinced of. If you don't find it convincing that God is the best explanation for the cosmos, then what are you putting in that place? And do you have as much epistemic certainty based on that as you would for God? Or is it kind of a question mark in either place and you're filling something into that mystery? Because and we could go down the line just to be aware that for everything that you find unbelievable about Christianity, what are you finding to be believable? And what is the standard? And if you were to apply that standard to the Christian claim, how does all that actually work out? Because I mean, it would be actually really interesting to have that conversation. I wish that we could do it. Because I think that it's not that you just love things that have really strong evidence and hate things that don't have strong evidence, and you believe all the things with strong evidence and reject all the things with weak evidence. I don't think that that's how it is. I think that you believe a number of things that have the same or potentially even less evidence than the Christian things, but you choose to believe them or are in some way inclined to them for different reasons, which I don't want to speculate about your reasons or your motive, but I am highly skeptical of the idea that you only believe things with really strong evidence. I think if we were to go through that calculus and go down the list, I think the standard would probably not be consistent. Don't take offense at that. That's just my guess, because when I run similar diagnostics on myself, I find a similar thing to be true, that I am not totally objective with how I evaluate evidence, and that I have certain proclivities and biases towards certain things for certain reasons and against other things for other reasons. And I think as a human being, I'm imagining that you're the same. And I just think that that's worth considering. Like, what is the actual objective, observable, repeatable scientific evidence for the multiverse, for example, compared with the God hypothesis? You know, that would be just one example, but an interesting place to start.
Really well said. Well, guys, we are over time already, unfortunately, and so I really appreciate everybody who's submitted these questions. We didn't get to answer them all, but thank you for joining us today. If you have more questions, thankfully this is a once a month live stream, so you can join again and ask those, or you can ask our your questions on our website, which is apologetics.org, and we'll do our best to get back to you. We also wanted to ask Brandon, just what are some upcoming projects that you have coming up, or ways that people can get in contact with you and your material?
You can get in contact with me through, I think there's an email. The easiest way is probably dailydoseofwisdom.com, because that has tentacles towards everything else that I'm doing. The Wisdom Society is like an online community that I run where we do weekly Bible studies and we do a book club. We're reading this book right now, by the way, which is so good. I am loving this book. If anybody,
Oh, wow, really? Great.
Oh my goodness, this book is amazing. It addresses every way in which people misconstrue Jesus, and it's really, really awesome. It's very like, what's the word? Comprehensive. Like it is comprehensive. So yeah, dailydoseofwisdom.com. And then in terms of projects, oh, I can't reach it. It's over there, and I'll talk about it more in my channel later, but I'm not actually starting it. I'm collaborating with a good friend of mine to start a coffee company that is working alongside with Compassion International to try and pour gasoline on their fire and get a bunch of kids out of poverty in Jesus' name. So I'm really excited about that. But that's a little bit in the future, but I guess I'll just tease it here since you asked. That's been the main like sidebar thing I've been working on.
That's exciting. Well, now that I'm a coffee drinker,
yeah,
I'll
exactly.
have to partake in that. So that's really exciting. For anyone who didn't see the what Brandon held up, he was holding up the Incarnate Christ and His Critics by Ed Komashevsky and Rob Bowman. Incredible resource for anyone who is interested in the evidence for the deity of Christ within Scripture, which that is I think it's the foremost book on that subject. It's the top scholarly resource on that question, and they do an incredible job with that. So it's great.
Yeah,
If anyone's interested in that reading group, you should join in on that, because that's awesome.
They really, really cook, chat. That's what we're trying to say.
Absolutely. They're the goats. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Brandon, and thank you for everyone who submitted questions. Feel free to share the stream after it goes live. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on X, and we will see you in the next one.